possible. So now like to introduce today's speaker, Margo Lukens. And let me just go about this slightly roundabout. Creating a sustainable future is going to take many different kinds of collaboration. And we're fortunate to have wonderful colleagues with a wide range of knowledge and know-how that can help us address this. And so if you've ever seen what we do at the Mitchell Center or heard a previous talk, we've had lots of folks with a lot of know-how from state government, town government. We've had talks like that this semester. Tribal leaders, so sovereign nations sharing their knowledge. We have had leaders from the private sector, from civil society. We have lots of natural scientists from fields like climate change and fields like wildlife ecology. We have wonderful social scientists, like in fields just a few weeks ago, like economics or anthropology. We have great engineers at the university and other institutions of higher ed who are really important for this work. But one area that I think we need to do a much better job of tapping into their expertise is the work that comes out of the arts and the humanities. And so last semester, UMaine philosopher Don Beath helped us reflect on the many ethical issues that arise in addressing sustainability challenges. Today, we're fortunate to hear from an expert in literature, including the ways that stories can help us understand how we got here and how they can help us create a brighter future. Margo Lukens is a professor of English. Her research interests include Wabanaki literary and storytelling history, Indigenous plays and playwrights. She's produced and directed plays herself, and she was the former director of UMaine's McGillicuddy Humanities Center. When I was talking to her recently, she told me a wonderful story about things that people in universities do sometimes. In 2015, she was all set to go on sabbatical, and she said to write up some traditional academic papers. I've done that myself. And I hope she's going to tell you today how she went off script. She didn't go down that path. And I've got to tell you that again and again, I've heard from many different people that that's what this work requires. Going off script, winging it, playing it by ear, improvisation. Some other time we'll have to have some artists come and tell us how they think about sustainability, because I can assure you that improvisation or going off script is the very essence of what it means to be a jazz musician. So today we get to hear from a wonderful professor of English, Margo Lukens, whose talk is entitled Restoring Penobscot Language Use, how an English professor is helping access vital knowledge for a sustainable future. Welcome, Margo.
Thank you, David. That's a nice introduction. And I want to thank you and Linda Silka and Ruth Halsworth and Carol Hamill, who have very carefully steered me towards this day. So I feel very supported in all the ways that a speaker needs to. I'm also grateful to any colleagues who suggested that I talk in this series. So I want to make sure that they know I'm grateful. Let me start my slideshow and oops, share screen. So thank you. I'm happy to be here for one of the sustainability talks. And I am grateful because this is one of the things that I, as director of McGillicuddy Humanities Center, was trying to foment really earlier collaborations between people in STEM fields and people in humanities fields to work on big problems. And I'm still not sure what the answers are and of how to get that going. But I think talking more about what we do is one way to begin. So another thing I want to do before I begin is to make an acknowledgement. Oops, how come I can't advance the slide? There we go. In doing the work that I do, I'm conscious that I, a descendant of settler people and a faculty member at UMaine, have made my home on Marsh Island and do most of my work in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation. Here, issues of territorial rights, to both land and water, and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki nations, the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Micmac, and Abenaki, through kinship, alliances, lifeways, and diplomacy. I support the university's continuing recognition that the Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki tribal nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. So here's the title. One of the things that I teach my literature students always is to think about the primary human fact of oral culture. For all human beings, narratives, stories provide ways of organizing our experience, of keeping memory. And in a culture that does not write, or that is an oral culture, all oral traditions contain all the knowledge the people have. And that's a very difficult thing to get your head around if you're coming from a written culture. The idea that as long as the people live and are able to transmit culture, that orality is a very reliable and flexible vessel in which to put knowledge. So in this talk, I'm going to try and foreground what I've learned in thinking about these stories that now are in writing and came down to their collection back in 1918 orally. And I've been thinking about these stories with Carol Dana and with Connor Quinn from my perspective as a literary humanist. And as David mentioned, I started working with these stories in the fall of 2015. And that was actually before the sabbatical he mentioned. That I will tell that story. But in 2015, the Acadia National Park Centennial was in planning phases. And the park had contacted Penobscot Theater in downtown Bangor to ask if they had anything on their schedule that would be appropriate to the Acadia Centennial. One thing led to another. The artistic director contacted Donna Loring, who is a Penobscot former representative to the Maine legislature, assistant to Governor Mills, and a playwright in her own right. But she suggested that they talk to me because I had done work with people in Native communities in Maine on theater. And she saw that this would probably be a project that would take a lot of collaboration. And I'm very grateful for her that she mentioned me, and this led to this very long-term project. So this is a photo of 3 people key to the project. Back in 2015, Carol Dana, who's on the right-hand side of the slide, and a number of people from Penobscot Nation agreed to start working on a possible script for presentation at Penobscot Theater as part of this Acadia Centennial. The person in the center of the photo is Amy Rader, who was at the time director of education at Penobscot Theater. And the vision that began to emerge was that the script we developed would then be realized in the summer of 2016 through the Dramatic Academy, which was directed by Amy. And Carmela Bear on the left in the photo was one of the students who was in the production. There were about 30 or 35 young people in the Dramatic Academy, and probably 15% of those people were from Native communities. And she was proudly a member of the Penobscot community, representing and and being able to speak her language on stage at Penobscot Theater. In this picture, we are at WERU radio station doing an interview with Donna Loring for her show Wabanaki Windows. And in fact, this interview is on archived at the WERU website. And we were talking about the play, which had been titled Transformer Tales, and took in the first 13 of Penobscot Transformer Tales about Gluskabe that came from an old publication from 1918. Frank Speck, ethnographer from University of Pennsylvania, had been at Indian Island in the 19-teens and worked with a man named Newell Lyon and collected this series of stories and a bunch more. But we liked the first 13, which did a nice story arc of the life of Gluskabe from really a young child living with his grandmother, learning everything important from her, and finally coming to adulthood and leaving the Dawn Land, looking over his shoulder to say, I'll be back if you need me. But so we get out to the parking lot after this interview about the play and about, you know, what we enjoyed about it and what we learned. And Carol turned to me and she says, Margo, we have to republish these stories. And she explained that her primary audience would be young people like Carmela and younger, Penobscot people growing up Anglophone. And she had a vision of bringing the stories of Gluskabe back into print in contemporary Penobscot orthography, with the idea that kids would find their way back to traditional language if they had some, you know, stories invitingly presented in their old language and in English, with a way between. And that was my off-script moment. The sabbatical project I thought I was going to be doing was, you know, how can I get published, you know, various articles that were sitting around in my career. There was one on a play by a Cherokee playwright, and there was another one on past theater projects with Penobscot Nation. But when I heard Carol Dana ask about this, she, you know, really provided me with a moment where I was able to be responsive to a project that she'd been thinking about for a long time, and which, having done this whole script making and theatrical production, I began to really trust that the stories had a lot to them and that they were very engaging to young people and really important to the Penobscot Nation. So indeed, I went off script, right off script, and changed my my focus and began working with Carol on republishing these stories. So here's an example of how we worked with Penobscot Theater. We had lots of different young people playing different roles. Inside the frog costume, there are 2 actors, and the Penobscot Theater brought all of their production values to bear on this project, which was really lovely for the actors. And Carol also was there as language coach, because everybody in the cast had to learn to pronounce Penobscot language. The script was basically for Anglophone people, and any Penobscot words, you know, were either explained or immediately evident from action what was really happening. But there were repeated words. The word for grandfather, musum, or thank you, or my grandson, Gwenas, that came again and again, so that even even the audience by the end of the play would know some little bit of Penobscot language. We had actors from age 6 to about age 36. And one of the keys to the project was, while we were engaging young people, we also had to stay absolutely true to the purpose of the stories and to the language itself. So here's a, for instance, Gluskabe on the left and his grandmother, Minimquasu, on the right, Minimquasu, the woodchuck. And the first 3 stories are really about food and hunting. And what the grandmother teaches young Gluskabe, even though he's very smart and he wants to figure out easier ways to do things. He wants to help his grandmother when she is trying to take fish. He wants a quick way to get a lot of game animals in his bag, but he has no limits. And so she teaches him the kinds of wisdom that have a vision of generations to come. And it's very important in these stories that the grandmother is the one who possesses this wisdom, and she passes this on to Gluskabe. Think about, you know, I had a moment where I was thinking about the church on Indian Island, which is called St. Anne. And St. Anne is grandmother to Jesus. And it seems as if the missionaries who came were often very canny. And this isn't the only place in the Americas where this is true, but that if there is something to which the missionaries could connect their work that existed already in the beliefs of the indigenous people, that it would be advantageous. And so thinking about the naming of Saint Anne, and of course it may be that it was in fact Penobscot people themselves who chose Saint Anne, given the reverence for the grandmother and for the wisdom of Minimquasu in this particular story. So she is saying, Aptama Gulalagu Gwenas, you did not do a good thing at all, my grandchild. And so this young lady learned to speak the Penobscot line and immediately to give the same direction in English. And every page of the script had Penobscot language on it for one or more characters. And we realized that this was probably the first time Penobscot language had been spoken from the stage of Penobscot theater. The teachings of the stories really connect to how you make your life in a place. And you know, after all, that is how culture arises, the making of a living in an environment with a particular kind of geology, weather, creatures, flora, etc. So the first 4 stories are about food, are about either hunting or fishing or gathering food. And the lesson in several cases is leave enough for our descendants, the people who come after. Sometimes the story has to do with making hunting possible for people. The story of the windbird, Gluskabe goes up to request less wind because he can't paddle to hunt ducks. He ends up in the version that we have being sort of a trickster and dumping the windbird in a crevasse, and then going home and finding out that if the wind didn't blow at all, that water would become stagnant and gluey and very difficult to paddle in. And so he comes back and manages to pull the bird out of the crevasse and negotiate with him to moderate the flapping of his wings and the creation of the wind. Very often, his lessons are about restoring balance. Restoring balance, distributing that which has been hoarded. There's a story about Grasshopper taking all of the tobacco, and Gluskabe goes to find tobacco because his grandmother says, we don't have any. And tobacco is important for ceremonial practice in all aspects of life. And so the stories connect existence, the very fuel of existence, very closely to spiritual practice, and also about awareness of the communal need for distribution of both food and this ceremonial substance. Some of his tasks also take in making waterways possible to navigate. He encounters the frog that he encountered in the last slide is holding back all the water, and he has to let this water out of the frog by felling a tree on the frog. And that's a really important story I'm going to talk about a little bit more because it connects Penobscot people to the river as well. The storyteller, the original storyteller to Frank Speck, who first published the stories in 1918, was Newell Lyon. And he was born in 1846, lived only a few months after, until after the tales were published. He died out hunting in the winter of 1919. But during the early 19 teens, he collaborated with Frank Speck and told him the stories, helped him translate, understand in English what the Penobscot words meant, and received a little bit of notice in the first publication in 1918 that he was a capable informant, is what Frank Speck said about him. But the idea of being a storyteller really is about, again, being a steward or a vessel of community knowledge, of generations of community knowledge, and in this case, certainly of versions of the stories that come down through the family to Newell Lyon. So we decided in our project to republish the stories, to foreground Newell Lyon in our process. But I want to show you first what the original 1918 publication of Penobscot Transformer Tales in the International Journal of American Linguistics looked like. This was a young journal that had just been founded the same year that these stories appeared in it. So what you have here is a page from the first of the 13 Gluskabe stories that we're working with. And in this story, Gluskabe learns how to use a bow and arrows, and he, at one point, kills a bear. So look, for instance, in the left-hand column, where you have Penobscot on the top line and English, literal English underneath. This was Frank Speck's work with Newell Lyon, and the written Penobscot was Frank Speck's first attempt, basically his seat of the pants transliteration of what Penobscot language sounded like. And he was trying to give other ethno-linguists a tool with which to start sounding out the language and, in his case, capturing what he thought was a disappearing language. And so, the practice of salvage, which was the thrust of much ethnography and ethnolinguist work in the turn of the 20th century, wasn't thinking about language learning, but about really communicating with other linguists about, look what I found, look what I found. And so you have the Frank Specs. Frank Specs invented Penobscot transliteration. You have his literal translation with New Lion, and then at the end, on the bottom of the right-hand column, you have a free translation that Speck then composed after looking at the literal translation and trying to make for himself a version of the story that would be readable to an Anglophone person. So I'm going to take you through just one or two sentences, because then I'm going to show it to you again in our updated version. So toward the top of the left-hand column, she said, "Grandson, a great beast killed bear. And indeed, now we shall live well, abundant fat, and you did well. We shall live richly." So the Penobscot is, I'll read it slowly and inexpertly, but almost right. Udialan guenas, chiawas nehlat awesus, nagasibi nigup golauzenena, mzela bami gulich muibibena. So it's not a it's not obvious right away how that should sound, and what later linguists have figured out about this first attempt is that Frank Speck didn't actually hear correctly in many cases, and there are ways that the language can be more robustly and elegantly represented, and you'll see that in our example in a later slide. So Carol and I, as we got to work on this, one thing we realized, this is me on the left and Carol on the right, Carol Dana, I've noticed she's got a photocopied copy of the IJAL 1918 version. And she worked from that always as we were starting this project. We found out we had to get together some money if we were going to have a publication. We got a positive response from the University of Massachusetts Press, but they asked us for $5,000 subvention, which is, sort of the usual story in the humanities. And that is one of the things that we were able to do, was to interest grantors in this work. And I felt like that was one of the things I, as a university faculty member, was able to contribute, was to tap various sources of grants. But right now, in this picture, we're in our office at Tim Hortons up on Stillwater Ave. This is the Tim Hortons that closed right next to Governor's, but they were very kind to us, letting us meet there at least once a week to work on this. Another thing that we talked about as we were trying to figure out the right format to reach young people wanting to learn the stories, to learn some language from the stories, parents who want to read to their children, teachers who want to bring the stories into classrooms, anyone interested in learning more about Penobscot stories, but who doesn't want to go into the stacks of Fogler Library to seek out the IJAL from 1918, we realized that we could do things to make it attractive to a lot of different age groups. And so Gabe Paul, who works in the Cultural and Historic Preservation Office at Indian Island with Carol, suggested that we include some illustrations with the stories. And we were able to get the UMass Press, which is an academic publisher, to agree to one black and white illustration per story. We have 13 stories. So we put out a call to the community at Indian Island and beyond, Penobscot community, to ask for illustrators. And we offered copies of the old stories to anyone who wanted to read and think about doing this. And so we got a few takers, but one young person, Shannon Sock Alexis, ended up doing 11 out of the 13 drawings. And so let me show you some of her work. This is two different drawings from two different stories. The picture on the left is Minim Kwasu, the grandmother, being tormented by a group of foxes. And Gluskabe's absent from the story at this point, and so his grandmother's on her own, and the foxes keep coming and mocking her and pretending to be Gluskabe, and she runs to the door and looks out, and they pee in her eyes. It's a very, it's a terrible, disrespectful, painful thing. This poor grandmother waiting for her grandson, and the foxes are disrespecting her and really damaging her in a way that the grandmother is very valued because of her long sight. We sent Shannon a few photographs of traditional clothing, and she put this beautiful women's peaked cap on Minim Kwasu. And the peaked cap is made of birch bark or other materials, but traditionally birch bark and decorated. But it's a piece of very serviceable outdoor gear for rain or snow or sleet or whatever. In this case, fox pee. On the right-hand side, Aglabemu, that's the frog, the one who's holding back all of the water. And Gluskabe's job in the case of this frog is to make it give up the water, because the people who've called on him are dying of thirst. It's a case of out of balance. And so after trying persuasion and wrestling, finally Gluskabe fells a tree on the frog, and the water rushes out to become the Penobscot River. And once the river is there, water's out, these people, the thirsty people, jump in the water, they drink, they swim, they enjoy it. And many of them get out again, feeling sated. But those that don't come out, those that stay in the water, become turtles or fish or insects of the river. And the story explicitly connects those creatures to the names of Penobscot family clans. But the story showing us that people stay in the river really tells us that the creatures of the river are literally the relatives of Penobscot people. And so that deep family connection is something that ongoing issues of self-determination, right, in the state of Maine, if this were fundamentally understood, I think we would not have the same kinds of legal and political struggles as we're having at this point. So the restoration of balance is a big emphasis in Gluskabe's work. He's Frank Speck called him a culture hero, which is a kind of ethnographer term for how do we describe this character in this in this particular story type. He's a hero because he restores balance, because he listens to the grandmother, because he respects elders, because he learns to share food and to steward game and game fish. There's a story where he goes to see his father. The stories don't really care about nuclear family relationships, but he goes to see his father, and his grandmother Menimquasu tells him before he goes that, by the way, your father has one eye. That's how you'll know him. And so Gluskabe, shortly before he arrives at the place where he knows he'll find his father, takes one of his own eyes out and hides it in a tree, so that who knows, perhaps so that he can feel or signal to his father that he's really his son. So there when he gets there, his brothers are extremely jealous, and there's a beautiful scene where he plays games with them and uses his playfulness to really call out these bullies who it feels are really plotting against his life. I have a question in the chat from someone who wants to know what Penobscot means. There are a couple of conjectures to that. Carol Dana's translation has to do with where the river widens out, and so it could be a place where you see more rocks, more white water against the rocks. That's another aspect of the translation of the name, is where the rocks look white because the water's piling up against them. But that's what I know from Carol. This page is what our book is going to look like. What you have here is 2 pages of our proofs. We don't have the book in our hands yet, but the proofs look like this. In the middle is the spine of the book. On the left-hand side is the Penobscot, and the right-hand side is the English. And notice we've done pretty much full sentences, or at least full phrases, at the top of each section, and below each section, then we break down the words in the order they come in the Penobscot and translate them on the right-hand side literally into English, so that the breakdown says, then she told him, my grandchild, great animal, that you killed bear, in a similar way that Speck's version told us. But if we want to just read a free translation of English, we can just read the top line. Then she said to him, my grandchild, it's a great animal that you killed, a bear. Also, in our free translation, we have tried to stay as close as possible to the order and the sense of Penobscot without doing too much violence to the English. But primarily, we let Penobscot meaning and word order lead us. Nagazibi niguap galauzenena mzelet bemi gulich mawi bibina. So finally, we live well. There's lots of grease. We will eat well together. So notice there's lots of space on this page. Your eye is free to go back and forth between the breakdown beneath each free translation or between each whole sentence of Penobscot. We anticipate if we have young children using the book, which is wider than it is tall, we're going to have people drawing in the book or making notes. Language learners absolutely should feel free to make notes and make it their own. So let me move to the next slide to talk about readers. We, as one of the things that we did with our grant was to ask for enough money to purchase a copy for every Penobscot household. And we're going to do that again for volume 2. Of course, the book has numerous possible audiences: early childhood educators, Maine K-12 schools. Teachers have been asking for various kinds of materials, and this book would certainly be a good one for that. Faith communities needing to learn more, conservation communities wanting to really examine how traditions articulate stewardship, any Maine citizen wanting to know more about this place and the people of this place, scholars of Native American literatures. I want to order it for my undergraduate and graduate students. I know there are people in other places in the country who very much want this and are very eager, and I'm sure across the border in Canada. And linguists all over the world are really interested in this and other Wabanaki languages. But that's what the book looks like. That's the cover. New Lion. And I like the way the title, Still They Remember Me, is actually the last line of the last story. And Gluskabe is talking about how when people call on his name and tell his stories, that he knows it and it indicates to him, still they remember me. I like the way it also feels like we remember New Lion. So to say volume 2 is coming after, there are 8 stories from the 1918 version that are not in Still They Remember Me. We only used the first 13 stories about Gluskabe's childhood and deeds. So in volume 2, we'll have 8 more that were in that 1918 publication. And then another 8 stories that Frank Speck collected, we think mostly from New Lion, but that have never been published in Penobscot. He published them in English, but stopped short of doing another bilingual publication. So that will be the first time those stories see print in Penobscot. And that will be called Gluskabe and Other Heroes. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. And I just want to make sure that I give great thanks and acknowledge the people from Penobscot Nation and the other Wabanaki communities who've all, in the last 29 years, really been generous and patient with me and made it possible and taught me how to do this work. And partly that has to do with listening and getting to know people and hearing it when they say, this is what we really want. In the fine print down there, there's other opportunities, and I think these are important because they're opportunities to hear not just me, but Carol Dana from Penobscot Nation and Connor Quinn, who's the linguist we've worked with. He's like one of the only linguists in the world who specializes in Penobscot, and so he's also in demand on the Penobscot Dictionary Project, which is going to be the next publication in the contemporary Penobscot orthography. Ours will be the first. So in early June, we're going to do a talk for Abbey Museum. Mid-June, we're going to talk at the Stabilizing Indigenous Languages Symposium. And in the fall, we'll talk for the American Philosophical Society, which is where many of these stories are kept in manuscript because the Frank Speck papers and the later Frank Siebert papers are also stored there. But all of these talks will be available on Zoom. They'll be scheduled on Zoom and available in recording, I'm quite sure. So I think I want to stop there and let Linda do her magic and wrangle the questions.
Margo, that was such a wonderful talk and filled with so much information that we can all think about day after day after day. And your work with your colleagues is just enormously important for us all to think about. And I think we probably would all say we're so glad that you pivoted, that you decided to help us all learn and think about important issues and to learn about your colleagues and the work that you're doing. There's so many different themes that you raise that are really important. One of them, of course, is collaboration. And you talked about collaboration in a number of ways. If you were to try to say to the STEM faculty and the STEM students, if you were to offer some suggestions for collaboration for them, would you have some suggestions or advice? It's fine to say no.
Well, I don't know. You know, I think that it's very important to lay down some stories. You know, I think I mean, depending on the project. I mean, I was talking to Sean Smith, who's the colleague in water resources. I don't know exactly what it is. He was talking about taking his students down the river. And I said, Sean, what we should do is get your students to get together, some of my students, and read some of these Penobscot stories about the river, about, you know, the creatures, about, you know, the connection to the people. And also to show them the language. Because I think, you know, if you know there are people and, you know, stories that guide, you feel differently and you act differently than if you regard your work as a domain where you just simply go in and slice things up and put things in places.
Yes.
There are people who are connected, and that means, number one, probably you need to involve the people, but for all the young people coming into any kind of learning about these fields, I would think that, you know, starting with narrative it's so basic to human beings, and it's a way to you know, win hearts and minds, and to convey information in a way that can be re-accessed and relearned from. There, you know, it's like, you know, you come back to a text and you learn something new from it each time.
Oh yeah, that's such important points. Jumping just a little bit, you listed potential audiences for your book, and your book sounds very exciting. And if you imagined a room filled with all those varied audiences that you mentioned, the different people who could potentially read it and benefit from it, what conversations do you think would go on, or what would you like to have happen so that people are not just reading it in their individualness, but your book is helping to bring people together? What would that look like?
Well, you know, as I had never actually thought of that's a really nice image. You know, have those audiences talk to each other. You know, in some ways, that's obviously what you do with the book, isn't it? You have a book group, right? Thanks, Linda. So yeah, you know, it's like getting literally on the same page, because you are all able to refer to a you know, an articulation of a relationship, or an articulation of a value, or, you know, a deeply held truth. I mean, maybe little T truth. I don't know if anybody believes. But the idea that you know, kids in Maine K-12 classrooms wouldn't be complete strangers to what, you know, say maybe kids growing up on Indian Island might already be learning these stories, but might learn them, you know, at age 2 being read to, you know, at home. I listened to the conservationist talk last week, and I thought, oh, you know, jolly good. Having those people in the room would be super great to, it's a way to connect without being invasive, and to learn, you know, too often people, you know, people from settler culture are like, we can't learn anything unless a native person tells it to us, or a black person tells it to us. We can't learn anything unless one of the oppressed group can come and tell us. But the fact is that, you know, people from all kinds of indigenous groups and other groups impacted by settler colonialism are busy writing beautiful books. And you know, this is a representation of oral storytelling that, you know, we're very privileged to have this window. I think I didn't really answer your question, but
no, that was great. That was very interesting. I mean, one of the themes throughout some of the points was about restoring balance and things being out of balance. And do you have any thoughts about how, as we look at the book or we think about what you had to say, we might play with that theme, think about that theme? And again, it's fine to, you know, that's could be an out to lunch question, but you did a great job of talking about balance kinds of things.
Well, you know, balance has something to do with accepting the way things really are and the pace at which human beings really do things. And I think very often, you know, at the university, or, you know, maybe in contemporary life, we set schedules and we set calendars and we set processes in motion. We have grant deadlines and things that are very calendar driven. And I think, you know, there are ways that with I don't think it means that we give up clocks and calendars, but I think what we, you know, one way to restore balance would be to humanize the pace at which we accomplish things. I mean, for one thing, I mean, the whole thing about do I take on a project in my sabbatical that I can, you know, hurry up and finish by myself and, you know, shoot out to various, you know, journals and get rejected from, or, you know, get accepted at.
Yeah.
Do I start a process where I really don't know how long it's going to take? I really don't know. You know, I started without knowing how much money we need. I was, you know, innocent enough that I was sort of surprised to hear, oh, you're going to need $5,000. We got a lot more than $5,000, and we've spent it on things like, you know, talking about the book with colleagues at conferences, or paying for Carol Dana's time and for the time of various elders who've helped us. So I don't know, I forget where I was going with that, but you know, balance has to do with human pace. And here we are. Okay, so we start, she says that to me in late August 2016. And here we are in early April 2021. And we're going to have a book on the shelf as of, I don't know, next month, maybe.
And that's great. People are really interested in the stories about the Penobscot Theater and knowing if there's going to be the play again, and also just all the interesting things about sort of young people and playing elders, and any info you could provide about where things stand in terms of the Penobscot Theater?
Well, the play, which is called Transformer Tales, the script belongs to the Penobscot Nation. So
Mhm.
that's one thing to know. And so does our book. The
Great.
copyright is Penobscot Nation. Um, uh, there have been, numerous requests, from individuals. Oh, please, can we, see that play again? When the play was on, there were teachers accosting me at intermission saying, "I really want my students to see this play. It's so great." And I have given some thought to ways to create, a touring production that would go to various locations in Maine, including tribal communities, and would involve teachers and students along the way as participants to some degree. It would be about a learning process, not just about performances. And but again, this book really took precedence, and maybe that is going to happen. When when I have my next sabbatical, I'll write another grant.
This is great.
We'll see.
One of the wonderful things about your talk, and there were many wonderful things, but one of the wonderful things is that it really, I think, helps us all think about how much we need to come together. We need to have the humanities come together with STEM and with sciences. We need to have different cultures come together so we can all learn from each other. And I know my hope, and I'm sure is the hope of lots of other people, is that you've opened some additional doors for people so that we can think about working together to really weave together the ideas and not have them be, over here. So we aren't in person, so you can't hear us say thank you. But I think if people who can, if you can put a clap or something up on the picture of yourself. And I wish we had more time, but we don't. But Margo, thank you so very much for spending this time with us.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I also want to say I just put a name of a young person in the chat, Nolan Altivator, who's a graduate student now at the University of Maine, has been working with Wabanaki Youth in Science, and also is a education major with a creative writing minor, and part of his work is going to be working with young people in Wabanaki communities on creative writing. So, there's all kinds of people connecting science and humanities already. So let there be more.
Thank you. Thank you. And we look forward to continued talks with you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.